Okay, I just started the recording here. So how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Amp Hangs here on the Gearland. I'm here today with Arafel Electronics with designer tech Chris. Hey, Chris, how you doing today?
Awesome.
Now, where are you from, man? Upstate New York somewhere? Where's your company based?
Now we're in upstate New York. I mean, I'm from Jersey originally. In my 20s, I ended up in Florida, like I think a lot of people in Florida do. Um, so I started the company down there, but just last winter, my wife and I moved up to upstate New York to actually move a little bit away from people and to actually buy a house because the housing down in Florida got crazy expensive and basically set down roots and be closer to family and closer to some other stuff like pizza and bagels that are actually edible.
Man, have you heard of Pure Salem guitars?
I haven't, no.
Oh, well, you mentioned Florida, so I thought you might have been familiar with them. I think they're in Miami. Um, well, yeah, we're on Chris's Instagram page here. We were just talking about uh, tweeds and champs, and we just so happened to wind up on a vibro champ that Chris designed. Really cool design here. I like the color and I like the grill cloth there, the patterns. That's one thing everyone will see today is like how unique your designs are. But uh, give us a little down low on this little vibro champ.
Well, the crow cloth actually came off of an old organ. That's one of the things that I started with the company is I just started picking up old organs and gutting them for parts. Even the solid state ones ended up with some decent speakers or a cool looking grill cloth like that. I thought it matched perfectly with that wine Taurus Tolex. I don't know. I like things to look special as opposed to just the standard Marshall or Fender black with the standard grill cloth that's maybe silvery or gray or black or whatever. I figure why not have a little fun with it. In terms of the guts of it's it's just like a Silverface Vibro Champ. The power supply does have a choke in there before the output transformer. That way it's a lot better filtered because with a single-ended amp like that, there is no common mode rejection, so you can end up with a lot of hum out of them. It's not as big of a problem on a lot of the champs because the speaker just doesn't go that low. The little 8-inch speaker um, doesn't go low enough to put out a bunch of 60 cycle hum. But
Yeah.
and then it's also a really cool looking 6L6G power tube that I got out of some old test equipment.
Is
There's a
this
bunch of
is that this
old
from this Coke can? Coke
yeah.
bottle? Nice.
So it's kind of in the middle of a 6V6 and the 6L6 GC you'd find in a bigger Fender amp or Mesa or whatever. But I don't know, it just looked cool and I had it sitting around and was wondering if I could make it work. So that's story of a lot of stuff is I've got a bunch of parts and what can I build from it kind of thing.
Well, that's like design 101. I mean, like that's how everything got started. There was only, certain transformers that I mean, what a lot of people should realize is designers are building amps around a transformer. I mean, is that right? I mean, it's basically what does my power supply dictate? That's going to decide which power tubes go in the amp. And, the preamp is a separate issue from that. It's really what's my B plus voltage rated at, and what tubes do I need to put in to accommodate that? Am I like on track with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like the power supply is that's the I mean, all a tube amp is really is a power supply that modulates the AC signal based on the guitar you put into it. It's just a big, very inefficient power supply. But so yeah, you start at the power supply and then you start from the output to the input kind of thing. I mean, that's traditionally how things are designed. Sometimes I will just sort of piece together and then figure out what I need to make it work. But the by the book, if you will, way is you design the power supply first, that get whatever voltage is on the in the power amp you want to do whatever you want, and then in the preamp, changing the voltage can change the point of breakup and whatnot. But
Is it,
yeah,
have you noticed that, like, this is just something after years and years of thinking about it, I came up with this theory, but so when you have like a lower plate voltage running your power section, your power tube or tubes, um, a lower plate voltage will give you a looser sound, and higher plate voltage will give you like a stiffer sound. Is that kind of accurate, or?
I mean, based on where I a lot of times I'm working straight off of the data sheet because the power tube data sheet was made by guys way smarter than me, and they didn't have the benefit of just being able to pull up information. They actually did a bunch of testing and stuff. So I'm basic where your plate voltage and the reflected primary impedance of the output transformer and where your screen voltage is and what have you can determine what sort of not only the output amount but also the amount of distortion, whether it's second, third, fourth, etc. order. um so yeah, any further into the engineering part of it, I'm not actually, I mean, I went to an engineering school. I studied math because I liked calculus and didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do useful with my life. So I'm not an engineer by education. I guess I am sort of by trade, but that just
Sure.
sort of happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, we got, is this like a reoccurring theme throughout your design where, back to the Hammond grill cloth, you're sort of, uh, we call it cannibalizing, old radios, old organs. I mean, you have designs that are directed at doing that, but then you also have other designs that are more, from new parts too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it started just picking up old organs because at this point they're not worth anything. People will try to sell them, but even an M2 or an M3 organ that people would chop up and play on stage, you can you can damn near do all the sounds of that in an iPad and not have to carry around a 3, 4, 500 pound thing. So a lot of times, even when people listed on Craigslist or Facebook that they wanted money for it, my offer was I will pick this up and not charge you to haul away what basically is junk. Um,
Sure.
being in Florida and even in places upstate New York here, Aunt Sally passed away and she had this organ that she had since the 60s or whatever, and people are just trying to get rid of them.
Sure.
It's funny thinking about the pricing of them because some of these organs were 3, 4, $5,000 back in the 50s and 60s, where like if you adjust for inflation, these were like 20, $30,000 piece of equipment, that are worth pretty much nothing these days. But that's why I like to reuse this thing. It's much better than it just going in a landfill. And I wish they made them out of better wood, because if I would have used them for making actual amp enclosures combos and heads and stuff, but most of them, even in the 50s, is a press board with just a veneer on it, which sucks that I can't reuse that. I can't do anything with that.
Well, they're absolute gold mines for, new old stock tubes and I mean capacitors, transformers. It's pretty amazing what people can do, like yourself. I mean, so we've got another amp here that's AO44, or that's the Hammond AO44 reverb. Is this a sort of like salvage amp?
Yeah, that was the chassis was the actual reverb chassis, which is super small. It uses these 6 GW8 tubes. They've got another ECL 86 or something like that is
Yeah, that's it.
the British naming. But it's got a triode and a pentode in it, so it's almost like an EL84 with a I think the triode similar to a 12 AT7. But so really with just those two tubes and push pull, you can make an amp without adding anything. Being a more power and more distortion guy, I also added a 12AX7 to it. The amp actually ended up way more out of control than I would have wanted it. And if I had done it again, I would have probably not gone so crazy with the gain in it, because, little bluesy combo doesn't need to sound like a Friedman or Jose modded something. But
Yeah, especially if it's Fender-ish, So, another thing I've noticed about your design is you use a lot of different tube configurations that are definitely off the beaten path. I mean, this one in particular, 6CA4 rectifier in that.
yeah, I mean, I think that's similar. I think the Easy 81 in like the smaller boxes are similar to that. But that's the rectifier that was in that chassis. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times I will just, whatever tubes I have, I'll figure out something to do with them. I actually have a whole box full of 12 F8 FB8 or something like that from a Wurlitzer organ, that it's this weird thing where there's 4 plates and 2 grids and a common cathode. But I've seen where some folks have turned that into a trem amp. So, I want to, or at least the oscillator for tremming an amp. So I want to try that at some point. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to try. I've got like piles of partially completed builds and stuff like that. There's, even though there's nothing new in tube technology, it's like, everything was settled like 70 years ago kind of thing.
Mhm.
There's so many interesting things that can be done.
There's 4 plates in one tube. I've actually never heard of that.
Yeah, looks just like a 12AX7, but it's got 4 plates. It's the configuration is 2 plates and 2 plates. They've each got their own grid, and then they share a common cathode. Similar to like what is it, the old Marshalls that have the input stages that share a cathode on the different channels kind of thing. So it's kind of similar to that, but then with 2 extra plates in there. And
Oh,
they use that as the oscillator to actually generate the tone of the organ, where Hammond uses a really weird machine kind of thing, the tone generator. These ones use just tubes.
so okay, so it's got 2 plates on side A and 2 plates on side B.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And that sort of, yeah, so you could run an entire preamp just from that tube.
Sort of. I mean, they share the cathode, so
Hmm.
you could run into issues if you were. I mean, if you had two of them, you can, make it in parallel, but you'd run into some issues with because they're inverting amplifiers sharing the same cathode. But in terms of making an oscillator for a trem in an amp, I forget which amp I was thinking of. Oh, I have a reel to reel amp that I again one of those things that it's sort of half built. It's the amp part sounds great, but the oscillator for the trem just wasn't enough voltage because I used a bunch of those they call them AA5 All American 5 radio tubes like the Silvertone amp in the case and stuff like that that these ones they would use them without a power transformer. It would just plug into a wall kind of thing, series string tubes. Now, not very safe because
Widowmakers, right?
yeah, exactly. Not very safe in that kind of form, but if you use an isolation transformer, you can get some interesting sounds with them. So I figured this old stereo reel to reel player would be kind of cool to have it as like a bluesy amp like that. And it does. It sounds cool even through the little. It's got like 4-inch speakers on it or whatever. So obviously you're not pushing a ton of bass, but it sounds cool. I just the trem oscillator just didn't work as I had intended it to.
Trem oscillator. So with one of these tubes, and I, I forget what model you said the tube was, but so you would be able to have the input from the first plate and the output on the second plate on one side of the tube.
Right. And so hopefully either that or bouncing them back and forth to, get the thing to oscillate without having a ton of gain, because most trem oscillators have a ton of gain in order to get them to oscillate, because it's not, nobody makes audio tubes with the direct purpose of oscillating. That's like a byproduct of too much gain.
Hmm. Man, we're learning some new stuff on the show today for sure. It's great. I love it. Uh, let's go up to another amp here, and then we'll talk about definitely want to talk about the amps that you emailed me with these interesting names here. But let's just go one more amp on your Instagram real quick. Okay, we got a Kinase.
Kind. That's the actually I think that's the amp from um the AL44 reverb chassis.
Oh, we just looked at the reverb chassis. Okay.
The purple one there is it's it's like a 2-watt plexi all out of scavenged parts.
Oh my God.
If you scroll down a little bit, it shows the cone board that came out of one of those Hammond chassis. The capacitors are new. I usually don't reuse capacitors, just because a lot of times in old stuff they're leaky, and it can add problems into the troubleshooting phase. So I find it's a lot easier to use new caps. Sometimes I'll reuse resistors, although the carbon comps are almost always noisy as hell. And
Yeah.
I I try to, this one has one. I think that's for the cathode of the power tube. It might be, you know, I but
Yeah, let's take a deeper dive. Okay. Um, Cathode. So these right here would be for the cathode, like
actually it looks like a no. What is it? That's That might be a negative, the negative feedback resistor. Now that I'm looking at where it is,
Yeah, it is kind of hard to, but is that the total preamp right there?
Basically, I mean, it's missing some of the components. You can see where um, the cathode resistor and cathode bypass capacitor on the left-hand side would go. But yes, it's most of the preamp and part of the stuff from the power amp. You can see the tone stack there right next to that big carbon comp resistor. Um,
Right here, yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it just basically just like a Plexi, I made it for a guy that didn't really have a need for loud sounds recorded. This one actually has a line out to record from, and you don't have to plug in a load because there's a couple of big power resistors in there so that he could plug it right into his interface and you know not have to have it hooked up to a cab. This one, the chassis actually had the little bends where you put the mounting screws in the front and the back, so that's why the enclosure is weird like that, because there's a good half-inch of metal that I had to find a way to secure through the front and the back so that the chassis didn't flap all over the place.
Sure. Now, I wanted to talk about the tone caps, new old stock tone caps from a Plexi, from a Tweed. You mentioned that, a lot of times they leak. And why do you think that there's so many people that want that new old stock component in their amp? They want what the hell are the Astrons? They want the Mullards. I mean, is there any advantage to having those in your circuit if they are, uh, you know, in good shape?
I mean, there's an advantage if you sell them. I've I've had down where I lived in Florida, we had an electronic surplus store where people will just drop off stuff sometimes. Again, dad dies and he's got a whole range of capacitors and stuff like that. So I've picked up a couple of things that I've sold for tone capacitors. I'll use them in a guitar, no problem, because if they leak DC, that's not gonna make an issue. In terms of sound, I don't hear it. I don't. I think it's a good story, and it seems that guitarists, maybe more than other consumers, you don't hear about somebody caring about the magical properties of the components in their laptop or their TV, but guitarists seem to like a story. I always joke about these hand rolled capacitors made by Tibetan monks or whatever that some people um, can sell for quite a pretty penny. Um, I don't know. I'm I'm how would I say this? I'm a skeptic on that kind of thing. I'd rather have something brand new that is more likely to work. Um, it's going to work. If it doesn't work, and I've gotten bad batches of capacitors before,
Mm-hmm.
then that sucks. But at least it's a $1 or $2 part instead of a 10, 20, $50 part.
God.
Um,
Oh, here, I just randomly switched over to your Google Drive and we've got the version 2, it looks like, of that Iulia. Is that the right pronunciation?
Olaya, that's actually the version 1 is the first amp I built. It was from a Hammond chassis. It's all point to point. I moved fairly quickly after that and a couple of other builds to not do point to point because it gets a little chaotic when you've got um, that complex of a build. It's not even that complex. Yes, it's got reverb, but it's not like there's trem or, there's not a whole lot going on, but it's still pretty complex and it's a huge pain to troubleshoot. I it pull whatever's left of my hair out trying to troubleshoot something like that. That works. I never actually boxed up the amp because I thought, hey, I want to see the shininess of the steel chassis. And I did not think to put any sort of finish on the steel chassis. So all the places where I rubbed off the powder coat or whatever was on there, it rusted. So that's on my list of doing at some point. But it was easier to build a version 2 of that amp using tag board than it was to take everything off and get the rust off and paint the chassis and do all that other stuff.
So this right here, where everything's, all the terminals where everything is, what were you calling it?
These are terminal strips where it's just,
strips.
Really a tie point or to tie things in. The version 2, which I'm not sure if I sent you the gut shot. So there's the same exact amp, but on a tag board, so that if you need to troubleshoot it, you're not sifting through components that are soldered from a tube socket to a terminal strip to a pot on the front. You've got most of the main components on the tag board.
Does the tag board help prevent shorts and stuff? I mean, it seems like the terminal strips, you might run into problems with shorts, but does the tag board sort of solve that problem?
Not really, because most of the stuff you're doing on a terminal strip or point to point, they've got a lot thicker leads. So, if something bends in there, you've got bigger problems than a short, because it shouldn't really be happening. But what it is you can make the circuit outside of the amp chassis and just wire the board in. So that makes it easier to make them in quantity, because you can do one thing, and then, I don't have a big production set up just yet, because, there's not I'll put it this way, you don't get into the amp repair or building business to become rich. I'll tell you, I probably would make more working at McDonald's than I have on most builds I do, but I can do builds in my house watching a baseball game, hanging out with the cats, and
Sure.
I kind of living a freer schedule. So it
Yeah, so with this tag board, you can assemble that first, and all you need to do is wire into the pots and the tube sockets and the jacks, and that's what you're saying, right?
right. So it makes it a lot easier to make them more in quantity, to have a more consistent product. And it also makes it a lot easier to service, because everything's right there in front of you. You're looking at it. You don't have to do so much in tracing out the circuit or hoping somebody left you a schematic or what have you.
Definitely. That's cool. You've got a version. How many watts is this one?
That's also from a Hammond. It uses Hammond power transformer. It uses the way the Hammond, the L100 or whatever series, the way they run a reverb is off of the plate of a preamp tube, and they run it through this big old choke. So it uses that reverb choke as a power choke, and the output transformer came from the Hammond. The reverb tank came from a Hammond. So it's all right around 15, 18 watts, because the L100s run 2 EL84s, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because Hammond was a US company. You'd think they'd be running all US tubes as opposed to an EL84, which is more of a British thing, but what have you, they run. And one of the things I like about these old organ amps and the tubes that come out of them is it's not like Granny was turning up the volume on the organ, blasting it until distortion. So even if they're the original Hammond branded tubes, there's a good chance there's some life left into them.
Totally. That's a good point. And a lot of times, like these people, with the organs, maybe they played them once or twice a year, you know, knowing how people are and their schedules. It's like some of these are just probably brand new condition almost. All right. Now I wanted to actually go back and see. You had a video of one of these amps in action. These still have a lot to talk about. I mean, we could have like 2 or 3 episodes with you. You've got pretty cool story. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and we don't have to talk about everything. I mean, I'm fine with that, but you know, whatever. You're the boss with this. I'm just the guy talking.
All righty. Let me see here. Okay. How are we gonna get this on? All right. Here's what I'm gonna have to do real quick. I'm gonna have to sign um on my phone, and then there's something about like the screen share that doesn't end up working on the laptop, but on my
Hmm.
phone it ends up working. So I'm gonna I'm gonna log on my phone, and I mean, I actually think, man, that the next thing we're gonna talk about, I actually think you could kill it with like selling these. You know, you're the only person that I know that does Mad Amp clones. So
Yeah, well, and like it's funny. So a lot of the stuff I've made and sold has been to like doom metal guys that like the Mad Amp, the old orange graphic. They love that kind of sound because bassy, it's distorted. Um, actually, I bought a broken recent Fender Vibrolux custom Vibrolux reverb and gutted it and um made that and sold it to the guy that's got the studio, the all tape studio, and his desires for an amp are quite different than most of the doom metal guys, where it's just turn everything up and make it loud and distorted. And I actually told him after doing a couple of tweaks to it that I told him thank you because helped make me a better builder. Because if you're just making for distorted, where somebody's gonna throw a big muff in it, it doesn't need to. You're not looking for the lowest possible noise floor, where this guy was looking for that kind of stuff. So where a vintage Fender type amp would have carbon comps in there. I even tried carbon films and they were a little too noisy. So, I have one whole channel. I took all the resistors out and put metal films that, for him, he needed that noise floor to record quieter, non-distorted stuff. And, I dig that. I dig being able to make something suit what the person wants. I mean, I consider myself a musician more than a guy that builds and works on amps, which is also why I don't list and sell like $2,000 amps, because I'm certainly not buying $2,000 amps. I'm actually I'm playing worse stuff than I'm selling, because that's just me as a musician and growing up in the punk rock scenes, that you just kind of played what you could get your hands on and just turned it up.
pretty much, yeah. I mean, there's some punk rockers that have. You mentioned Peavy, real quick. Greg Sage used a Peavy mace or something. I forget exactly what it was, but it caused, all these other punk rockers to sort of chase that tone. And I know Brody Dale from the Distillers she's using one of those now. And uh, what's that guy's name? Something Saga Born. He does all like the vintage Marshall demos. He did a demo of a PV, and it's like a $100 bass head, and it gets these amazing, distorted, saturated tones, and it's actually solid state. But anyways,
No, like I said, I'm old solid state like that, like the old PBs, the old acoustic amps. My favorite amp is an acoustic 140 bass amp. It's just this 100 watt, and this was back when a 100 watt solid state amp actually was 100 watts and just loud as hell. But you crank everything up and it gets a nice grit to it. I probably had 6 of them because I just pick them up broken and fix them and then sell them, kind of thing. That I don't know, I like the idea of having amps out there in the world because I don't usually have a need for a 100 watt amp. So if somebody's gonna play it, more power to them. I'd like to help that out.
totally so this is the Mad Amp right here, right? This little maker.
Yes, that's
Okay,
it's a 50 watt. That one has all transformers from a Baldwin organ. The chassis came from a Baldwin organ, which is why it's huge and heavy as hell.
nice.
It's the bias on this. The negative bias voltage actually comes from a tripler on a voltage tripler on the one of the taps on, because the organ transformers always have a ton of different taps, for the different things it's running. So
So the Mad
this,
Amp, you were talking about distortion, but to me, these things just have a a power section voicing that is just so heavy. To me, it's rather than being distorted, it does that weird saturated, what would you call that? It's like, you were mentioning first, second, third, fourth order harmonics. Does the Mad Amp, fall on like an odd denomination with that? Because whatever a Mad Amp is doing, it's very different than anything else, in my opinion.
well, part of it's because it's passing so much bass along, where a Fender or a Marshall might use a 22 or a 47 nanofarad coupling cap. These use like 68 nanofarads. That it's just there's so much bass that can make it through. That's why they have the depth or the FAC if it's on an orange graphic, which were made by Mad Amp. But
Mhm.
that's why they have that control, which is like a switched capacitor to give you the ability to cut some of the bass if you need to. But for the doom metal guys, they love that bassy sound. I I've since sold them, but I had two 2x15s. They were made by Custom. They were green. They had 100 watt Jensen 15-inch speakers and the best sounding cab ever. But for something like this, it just sounded so huge. Like I've plugged a combo amp into them and had it sound huge, but for this, it was just another level.
Yeah, customs here in Cincinnati, where I'm at, actually. Um, so is KSR and Reeves and I think some other groups. But let's hear this SOB real quick.
You know, one thing I did a little different than the orange graphic Mad Amp built kind of thing is they use a DC coupled cathodiene phase inverter that can be a little temperamental. I'm not the biggest fan of the cathodiene like in the the 5E3, or I think the Fender Princeton is what it sounds the worst in, unless you do that Paul C mod and bias it. But anyway, I uh I just had a regular old long tail pair in there just because they're a lot simpler. That's what I think of when I think of a heavier amp, because I feel like they can be a little tighter in the distortion sound.
Uh, long tail pair. We talked about that in Bruce Egnator's amp class. That's what is that? Just two cathode resistors?
That's what you're gonna see in um any of the Fenders bigger than a Princeton. It would differential amplifier kind of thing. It's got the two separate um plate resistors on it, and the um cathode has the tail on it, as they call it, since the long tail.
Okay, so you've also got the Mad Amp preamp here, Kioma. Wish we had a demo of this, but essentially someone could just throw that into whatever power section that they wanted to and get that tone that we just listened to on the Little Maker.
Yeah, there's a demo. It was recorded with my phone through just a regular solid, the old lead sled solid state power amp, um, through the bass cab kind of thing. But yeah, that's basically designed to to beat the crap um out of a power amp.
Oh, there's
The
there's the
guts.
circuitry. Yeah. Hey, I'm always curious about this. Is there a difference between the way a standalone preamp will interact with your power section versus a preamp that's, built in with the power section? Is there something that you can't get from a preamp with this application?
I mean, part of it depends on how the main amp, how it, you're running into either the power amp in or an effects loop. So depending on how that circuitry is, because I know on some of the Marshalls and actually a lot of the amps, they use a solid state effects loop that probably can't take the signal of this going at full blast. Like the signal of this going at full blast is loud as heck. That's why I added a DI output. So if you wanted to run it to the, either the front of the house if you're playing live, or run it to the recording setup or whatever, it's not just destroying the input because it's loud. It was so much gain that as I was testing it in front of a small amp head I keep in my shop, um, it was I was getting oscillations even though most of the gain was not even in the amp it was playing out of. It was in this box. It was insane the amount of gain how hard it was hitting the front of the thing.
Wow. Yeah, I've had to deal with that too. I wired up I had this Selmer treble and bass amp, 50-watt reverb. Someone took the reverb out, and these taps were just sitting out doing nothing. They were just literally exposed taps. So we came up with the idea of connecting the reverb uh, output to the reverb input, and we had oscillation going, and then we added a resistor between it that helped with the oscillation a little bit. I think it might have been like a 250K or something resistor, but even with that, it would oscillate after, 1 or 2 o'clock, and uh, yeah, oscillation sucks. I mean, it's compression and just terrible stuff. And I mean,
Especially in the reverb recovery stage, because that's like, the signal coming off a reverb tank is lower even than the signal coming out of your guitar. So there's so much amplification after that stage. That's why it's so sensitive to noise. That's why, the in terms of grounding schemes, you have to be careful, and it's why you make sure to get the reverb tank that works for your application and stuff like that, because if any of those things are off and you get a ground loop or you get something, it's loud. Because I would, when I'm testing an amp that I'm trying to see, do I have a bad reverb tank or is it in the circuit, I usually just short the send to the reverb in as well, and it sounds kind of like a really distorted treble booster almost, and on a good day, if you're not getting those oscillations.
and so, yeah, the reverb output, they step the voltage way up, and then on the recovery, they step it down, right? Because
Well, it depends on the send, the Fender style, which I guess the most amps are using the Fender style where you've got a reverb. It's you can plug a speaker up to like your deluxe reverb on the reverb send and hear it, because it's it's a 1 or whatever watt amplifier, but it's a loud signal coming out of it. Now the Ampegs and most of the reverbs I do is it comes right off of the plate of a tube. I usually just use a 12 DW7 because you got the 12 AU7 triode that's really good for driving the reverb tank, and then on the recovery you've got the 12 AX7 triode. So those tend to behave a little bit better than, say, if you did it on a Fender, where it's an actual power amp. It's not much smaller than a Champ transformer is what they use for the reverb transformer.
I'm a little bit like, I don't have like a perfect understanding of the triode pentode thing. I know that all I know is that a triode has one grid, and then the pentode has 3 grids. You've talked about using the triode pentode application several times. I mean, it's very useful information, but what, in these applications that you're talking about, what utility will a triode or pentode add? Like in general, I mean, like what can you do with a triode or pentode? I'm still lost on those two subjects.
Yeah, and I mean, too, there's pentodes that you could use in the preamp. Like some of the amps here, these, and I know I sent you pictures of the Lizon Al Gaib that that uses a pentode preamp like a Vox.
I'm gonna
And
go to
what you do is you can get a lot of gain out of just one tube. This amp is one preamp tube, one tube that's used for the phase inverter, and 2 power tubes, and you can get more than enough gain out of it because the pentode has so much more gain. Only thing that sucks is with the output impedance of a pentode, generally can't drive a normal tone stack like you can with a triode. Um, Now you can add you can add an extra triode and put a cathode follower. That'll work just fine. But like with this amp, I my philosophy was to, as simple as possible, to try to capture that pentode box sound. So it goes preamp two to the phase inverter to the power amp. The treble controller. This one is the first one I made. That was just a combo just to confirm that it would sound good, because they're not all winners. Sometimes they're duds and get dismantled and turned into other stuff. But this
Mhm.
one just has one tone control. It's like a Vox cut control. So that goes right in between the phase inverter and the power amp. The other version, the head version, it has that for a treble control, but then it also has the bass control is just a simple rotary switch that selects different cathode bypass capacitors on the single preamp stage, which has the effect as you turn it clockwise, you get more bass, you get more gain. But again, my philosophy with this one is to keep like as simple as possible. And this is one of the first amps that I'm going to make a demo for, just because I've used the combo version of this at churches for the past, I don't know, 2 or 3 years kind of thing. I really dig it. I do most of my recording through that type of amp, just because there's a lot of harmonic content and it's really neat. So now that I have a working computer set up, and at least temporarily, that's one of the first amps I'm gonna demo out, because it was something I'm proud of and something that I want to build a whole bunch more of. This is the one that actually the power transformers, the a toroidal transformer that was originally meant for a record player.
Oh,
I just got
is that the one that's like a circle transform?
Yes.
Okay.
And what's cool about those is that they don't have all the stray magnetic fields of the normal style EI lamination power transformer. So what it does is it doesn't spread those magnetic fields, so that you're getting interactions between the power transformer and the output transformer and getting hum.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So that's why I've seen a rack mount, a 1 unit rack mount power amp, the Marshall EL84 20x20, that uses those transformers. And I guess that's probably why they do it. So there's no interaction.
So there's no interaction. It's a lot thinner, so it's a lot lower profile, so it can actually fit in a rack unit, where a lot of normal power transformers just aren't made to fit in that kind of thing.
How do you spell that again so we can show the audience?
Toroidal.
There we go. Okay, so this is what Chris is using in the amp we're looking at. This type of transformer, it's like a uh little circular thing. Nice shielding on it, huh?
Well, so it's interesting. Basically, it's a core. I think I don't make transformers, but I have read up on it. I believe it's like it's a like a donut made of iron or what have you, or some sort of ferrous metal, and they actually wrap the windings around the donut
Oh,
instead um instead of how they wind the traditional power transformer. So it's I don't even know how one would make a machine to do that, because it boggles my mind. That's one of the reasons why I don't make transformers or wind pickups. I've got a guy that winds pickups, so when I need one wound, I shoot him a message and have him do it. But Yeah, so this one came from a record. It was meant for a record player. They were like $20 on eBay. So I was thinking for a while, what to make with it, and that's kind of what led me to make this. I've actually found a transformer that'll work made by Antec, and just last night I ordered 6 of them because I got a slight discount. Um, and it'll not only work for this amp, but it'll also work for some rack mount tube preamps that I'm gonna start building.
Oh,
Um,
dude, I want to get one of those.
it's like a microphone preamp for recording. Um, I mean it'll yeah, you can do it for a guitar amp too, but for me, I'm all digital setup recording, so I don't usually use like the flowy adjectives that people do for tube sounds, warm or this or that. I don't know. I'm not a there's a sounds good and sounds but it sounds bad to me. I generally don't. I'm not good with those kind of adjectives, but I figure if I'm all digital setup, why not add something analog like to it? So,
Sure.
the first one is going to be for me, and once I kind of tweak that and get that sounding good, um, I figure it's a good thing to have out there. I mean, I have a small rack mount preamp that has a tube in it, but it runs off of like a 12-volt power supply. Where I don't know when I eat, even that Hyoma uh, preamp pedal uses a full power supply. That's not it's not running a starved plate kind of thing where with a lot of pedals that you find with tubes in them, that's how it gets distortion. I don't know. I just like the couple hundred. There's something to me that a couple hundred volts, a B plus on a tube sounds a lot nicer than when it's tens of volts.
Totally. Absolutely. I know what you're talking about. So, I've got a pretty interesting way of getting some analog tone for recordings. I've got a buddy in Chicago that told me about it. It's one of the simplest solutions you could think of, but what you do is you use a super VHS player and run your recordings through that. And he told me it's essentially 60% of like the quality of a 2-inch tape. And actually, Super VHS was the highest fidelity tape recorder ever invented, and people don't, attribute it to that. But yeah, if you want some analog warmth and like that nice tape compression, uh, try to run your recordings through a Super VHS stereo recorder, and you can get those for $5 at Goodwill.
Well, and it's funny because you mentioned tape like that because you know, I I'm on a lot of forums for amp building and guitar modding and stuff like that, and also on Facebook and some of the groups I'm in. My suggestion when somebody wants to mod their $1,000 or whatever amp was like, hey, step back, get a VCR from your garage, practice soldering and desoldering on that PC board before ruin your amp kind of thing. Like that's I know I got a lot of practice when some of the first organs I got. I took every single component off the board, kind of thing. So I got a lot of practice on how not to fry the traces. Now I can tell you older boards are a lot better than some of the newer ones. Like the ones Fender uses in their newer amps are just awful. And by newer, I mean the past 20 or 30 years. They're just awful to solder on.
Oh,
And to
absolutely. Like a DeVille Hot Rod Series, Blues Junior, DeVille Deluxe.
Yeah, I
I've
mean
had to do it
the
myself.
amps sound great, but they're miserable to work on. They finally fixed the biggest, most glaring problem with the Blues Junior, that now they're cathode biased. Because before, if it wasn't modded, you were running the EL84s at like, I don't know, 140% of their maximum dissipation at idle, and not only would it eat through tubes, but the way they mount it is they have the tube upside down, and it's a board mounted socket. So the
Yeah.
tube gets hot, the socket gets hot, the solder melts and cools and melts and cools, and just a mess. And then little ribbon cables, but the darn things sound awesome. Like I picked up one because it was broken, and I fixed it, and I love the sound. I passed it on to a friend of mine that needed an amp. He was playing through like a crate solid state bass amp he was playing his Les Paul through. So, he sounds a lot better. But hey, and I get it. Growing up, we played a lot of crates. We played a lot of, whatever we could get our hands on. So I get it. But the Blues Junior sounds so much better on his Les Paul.
Yeah, yeah. And have you ever heard of the KT 66 mod for the Hot Rod series?
I mean, I can imagine what it is just by hearing it. Just throwing a pair of KT 66 and getting them biased up correctly, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, that's essentially it. And Fender's got like a handbook of like all their mods and repairs, and that was in there. And on the Gearland here, we've got a hot rod orange drop mod. You just switch out the Panasonics that are in there for orange drops, and that does a lot to increase the tone. And those are really cool amps to mod, all the hot rod series. But yeah, like that ribbon wire and the traces, wow. And even the boards themselves, I mean, they're so, feel like you could break them at any second. And then not
Yeah,
only that, but like if you do bend the board, the solder joints could get popped out of place.
that's one of the things with the old solid state amps with the, like the custom and acoustic and stuff like that. You can see some of those boards where they were laid out with a marker, like the traces were made. It's a big old thick trace that's about as thick as a Sharpie that doesn't have its point anymore. Back when it actually, somebody had to figure out how to lay the thing out. I mean, now you can do it on computers and stuff, but like it's almost art, because of how they laid it out, and how just it wasn't the most efficient way to lay it out, but it looks nice, and they're a lot nicer to work on too, because they didn't cheap out on the copper layers.
Yeah, man, that's really cool. Well, let's listen to the Mad Amp preamp. Let me figure out the name of this again and go back. The Heoma. Let's listen to that. Man, that's a pretty nice sound through a solid state power amp, and I'd imagine if you ran that through like something 100 watts, just be devastating. I mean, do you think people could get that same tone that we saw in the Little Maker video with if they plugged the Heoma into, you know, I don't know, a Sun Model T, just to throw something out there?
Yeah, I mean, really any tube power amp. I mean, that's kind of what it was made for. It was made to made for to have flexibility. So you throw this on your board and you basically have an amp. I mean, you want to shoot it out to a power amp, but it's a lot simpler to have just whatever power amp, a quilter. And I had a friend that played quilters for a while, and certainly nice size, the crate power block, something like that. It, again, simple stuff. My friend's a touring guitarist, so I can see where some of the other amps he used to play were not as easy to keep up and running. Although I guess he had the same problem with Quilter, but yeah, I mean that's basically what it was made through, is to go through just about any amp. Or if you're playing a gig that backlines the amps, you just go right into that effects return, and you have your sound without having to carry it around a head.
Yeah, is that the guy in Nashville that you made that Heoma for?
Um, no, it's a different guy I'm thinking of, but
How many of these Heomas are? I thought that was a one-off, but someone in Nashville was offering one of these for sale last week.
yeah, it is a one-off. In that size is almost definitely a one-off, because you can see from the gut shot, everything it's very cramped in there, and it was kind of, again, pulling my hair out just trying to get everything to fit in there and not sound awful and not short out. And there ain't no room left in there. That's why it doesn't have a light, because I didn't want to have the filaments going right through the middle of the circuit, and potentially causing more hum. Because there's I've I've got a second version of that I'm going to do. It's not going to be as tall, but it'll be wider and a little bit longer to give myself a little bit of room. I liked the challenge of fitting it in there, but once is enough. I'll make a little bit bigger and a little bit easier on myself.
I definitely want to grab one of those, and I don't know if the guy is still selling it. He never. I guess he maybe wants to keep it after all, but I want to get one of those at some point. Let's see. I'm going to go back to this email that you sent. Okay, we got first build ever. So that would be kind of cool to talk about this Aurelian. I thought.
Oh, and that's actually right by. I staged my background with amps, but
Yeah, let's get a shot of that. Let's get off the share screen and have you point that out. I'll get you in view right here.
got it.
There you go.
Yeah, let's actually show them right on top of it. Got a little bit of dust on it. We had some guys come and seal the rim joists with spray foam, so they had to cut out the drywall around the perimeter. I'm in the basement right now because that's where I have everything set up until I can finish my shop this spring. But wintertime, Cincinnati too, wintertime in New York is not really the time to finish up the construction part, because I'm basically at drywall and finishing and painting, and you don't really want to do that at 20 degrees and windy and rainy and snow and all that other stuff. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, I'm in a basement.
That's where I'm at too. I mean, basements are the best. I mean, they can be pretty inspirational, and that's where rehearsals happen and repairs and things. Let's find the Aurelian on the Instagram.
I don't. It's Irulan. I don't know if I have it on Instagram. I did send you some pictures of it, but it might be there. Like I said, I'm very bad with keeping the stuff on social media. It'll be down further though, definitely.
Oh, here it is right here. Okay, here's the amp right here. It's looks like the black version. That's a cool little cab comes with.
Well, and it's actually it's one piece. It's a combo. Um, I I don't know why I did it like that. I just felt like make. I didn't want to do an amp in a cabinet, so I just made the head part of the combo. Um, but it's got a big old 15-inch speaker from an organ. I have boxes and boxes and boxes of speakers from organs that the ones worth keeping I keep because they're useful. Back in the 60s they didn't really make guitar speakers and organ speakers and bass speakers. They just made instrument speakers. So I've pulled out of organs 10-inch Jensens that were going for like $200 on reverb kind of thing. Like when that happens, it's awesome because it's like like just getting the organ and the stuff is cool, but getting something with actual immediate monetary value was amazing.
Straight up, man. I've got this Tweed for sale, this Tweed Deluxe 5D3. Someone used a Hammond P12R as a replacement speaker. I mean, it's like Hammond was making some stuff that was identical to Jensen back then. So yeah, here's the Arulian?
Irelon.
Irelons. Sorry.
So basically, part of this was the chassis came from a Thomas organ that had the Thomas tube organ, but it was super narrow, like super duper narrow. I had the first amp I ever built, not the not the first amp from scratch or whatever, was a 5E3 like everybody else. It was a kit, and I had the board. I had long since taken that apart. The transformers from that went into my Fender Excelsior, which is now completely gutted and running a pair of 6L6s. I used caps and various mods and other stuff from that build, but I still had the board, and I didn't want to just throw a turret board away because it's not like those things are cheap. So I built it's basically like the Brown Deluxe 6G3, different tone controls on it. It's from the Brown Face Pro or Super or whatever, the really weird tone controls. But basically, again, it was one of those. I had the idea, and can I make it work? And eventually, I made it work. I say that like most of amp building isn't actually building the amp; it's trying to make the darn thing work after it's all together.
Sure.
Because you can do everything perfectly, but one stupid mistake and you've got no output. One of the reasons I like tube stuff better than the solid state stuff is, at least with a tube amp, you might blow a fuse, but a solid state amp, like when they're sick, you generally end up taking out parts, and like the more you turn a solid state amp on when it's sick, the more it breaks, kind of thing.
What is it like? NPN and PNP transistors?
Yeah, basically just the way it's interesting because it's the solid state amps, they're low voltage, like most of them are running less than 60 volts or what have you, 60-80 volts, but higher current, so that parts just can go up in smoke when you've got one little thing wrong, where at least a tube amp doesn't destroy itself when it's sick.
Well, it's funny you mentioned like the higher current, because that Silvertone, Widowmaker that's built into the guitar case. When it's a Widowmaker, these amps they're getting 15 amps of current through them. So, I mean, that is insane. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't know, a freaking Mesa Boogie Mark III Coliseum that runs 180 watts, maybe that's getting 3 or 4 amps of current. So a Widowmaker is getting like triple that.
Well, and what happens is those amps were at a time where we didn't have the grounding plug. So what you had was a plug with 2 prongs, and you turned it over depending on what's had the least amount of hum. And then, hey, you could be playing in a bar that somebody paid a guy in beer to wire it up. So who knows if the line and neutral are swapped. And those Widowmaker amps they put one of those legs on the chassis, which your chassis is connected to your guitar cable, which is connected to your guitar and the bridge, and your hands touching the strings, and you just got to be standing in a puddle of beer or a little bit sweaty, or touch the mic stand, and you get a nice big old zap.
And that's 15 amps. I mean, that's enough to say goodbye, pretty much.
No, there has been, I forget the name of the guy, but I remember looking up the Widowmaker amps. There was a guy in a band in the 60s or whatever that died from that kind of situation.
Speaking of the Widowmaker Silvertone, here's your reel-to-reel amp.
Yes, and that'll one day get finished. It just, I had to. I find sometimes when things are causing me to tear my hair out, I have to step away and move on to something else, because I'm not doing anything but making the thing worse. So I think I may be able to, using that tube we were talking about earlier, the 12 FB8 or whatever from the Wurlitzer organ, I might be able to make a better trem oscillator.
Someone was yelling at me. I had to mute it and tell him I'm in the middle of a Zoom. Sorry. God, there's always some distraction going on. Too many moving parts.
That's one of the reasons why I'm in the basement too, is that there's nothing down here. It's a little chilly. I've got the space heater on, so that's not too bad, but it's a 160-year-old house, so they didn't really make these places insulated.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a cool place. You had that view of the woods, and when you were playing like the Hayoma preamp and those doom riffs and that view of the woods, that's pretty funny. I mean, upstate New York's nice. Are you close to Ithaca or anything like that?
Not super close. We're about an hour west of Albany.
Oh,
So
okay. You're close to Saratoga Springs or something?
yeah, that's a little bit north of Albany. I actually went to a power violence show in Troy at this place, No Fun, about a month ago. That was a cool little spot. It was our first time going to a show up here. One thing I don't like, and it's the same in Florida. Growing up, we had like all ages shows all over the place. Like we were 15, 16, 17, and they'd rent out ballrooms, firehouses, VFWs to us to just throw shows. And it seemed like where we were in Florida, the only shows were in bars. And I don't know, at least for me, like getting to see all the bands and stuff like at 16, 15, whatever years old was amazing. That I don't know if there are places like that anymore, but that was one of the things when I started taking apart organs. I wanted to make fuzz pedals for kids like me that I couldn't afford a fuzz pedal kind of thing, like, on whatever change or whatever hustle we had as a kid. Like, I wanted to make fuzz pedals, but then I realized that for kids in high school, but I realized there was, I don't know where to meet them because we don't have all ages shows anymore. Um,
Yeah, I mean, New York seems full of like interesting venues, like warehouses, old churches, yeah, like the halls, maybe some even outdoor venues. New York is just loaded with like old archaic buildings. And I just went to a show in Columbus at a laundromat. People were just this laundromat with a bar attached to it, a little claw animal, stuffed animal machine, and man, there's some good times. And yeah, bars do get old. It gets old being in the same dimly lit wooden container all the time.
that was one thing I wanted to get together with people and make an all ages venue, but that's also the kind of thing that I don't know how the doors get kept open because selling sodas or whatever, or having I understand why all the shows are at bars. It kind of sucks that there isn't more for the youths, as one would say. To you know I don't know, I guess we didn't have the internet growing up, though. Like, we didn't have YouTube to see all these cool bands and download MP3s of you know anything you could ever want. So there is that, but there's something about live music that, like, grabbed me as a youngin', and certainly kept me interested in this kind of stuff. And that's, I make amps for people to use. It's I don't make I'm not into like collecting stuff in terms of amps. I like them to be used. That's why I'll pick, stuff I'll pick up that's broken, fix it, and get it on to somebody that can use and make music. Like, I know it's pretty cool to do that. Like I said, it's not a way to get rich. I don't think I'm going to be the next Fortin or uh, free, any of these other guys, but to be able to stay close to music and do this kind of stuff for a living and is pretty neat.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I mean, I do think that your preamp and the little maker. I mean, if people catch on to you doing that, I guarantee you're going to sell a lot of those. There's a lot of people that are seeking those out. I'm kind of like, I'm in your school of thought too. I am kind of, one of those idiosyncratic collectors that gets rare stuff. But, on the flip side, the way I look at it is the people that I sell to, it's like the blues lawyer, the professional musician, and it's a way for me to make some money because I have access to like old amps and collectors, and I'm in that circuit. But on the flip side, if I get something in trade, or you know let's just say like an EVH Stealth or solid state orange, whatever, I always give people a deal on the stuff that's like consumer grade, because like I understand like whoever's going to buy this just wants it to play it. So I give good deals to people on like consumer grade stuff, and then I get my payday with the blues lawyers and folks like that. And
Sometimes you have to with the collectors too, because they can be the biggest headaches. The kid that's paying $100 for a PV amp, he just wants something to be loud and make his guitar distort.
yeah,
As long as it does that, he's got no complaints. But I've had so many weird complaints about the collectors. So by all means, if you can charge them some extra bucks, do that, because it's definitely sometimes not worth the hassle.
well, I just had a guy that I sold an amp to, and he sent it to Mesa Boogie to fix the power switch. So like the power switch got rattled, and I'm at the point where I'm like, when I ship amps, I'm like, I am ludicrous with like how well I pack them. I mean, sometimes it's triple box. It's got the fucking 2-inch foam that I get from Home Depot. Like I separate the chassis and the cab, and something still goes wrong because these goddamn packages take a 6-foot fall from a conveyor belt. And I've got so many headaches from like people that I sell these collector's items to, but you know, I try to make it work, but it is hard. I mean, it's difficult, especially when you're shipping this stuff. Tube amps were never really meant to be shipped. But
No, and if basically the way I pack, kind of like you know, I assume it's gonna get manhandled because if I don't, then who knows if it's how many pieces it shows up in.
exactly. And it's happened to me before. It happened to me on a Berman Pro 502. UPS destroyed this thing. Luckily, someone was able to rehabilitate it, and you know, it's pretty much original still, but I mean, it was awful what they did. Anyways, let's talk about one more model, and you know, like I wouldn't mind having you back on, man. I mean, I really dig your stuff and your philosophy, and you're way more engaging than some of these other design. Okay, I'm gonna edit that out. Actually, let's see here. And I mean, hey, put me down for that Hyona too. I want to buy one of those at some point. Let's see, what else should we talk about?
I mean, if you find the red amp on Instagram, that's the Chome. I built it basically to test out EF86s. I picked up a bunch of EF86s at a flea market, and while the tube tester will tell me whether they're good or not in terms of life, they can be microphonic. So we're getting there.
Oh, we go.
So
We go up.
yeah,
Oh, here we are.
they right there. So in order, basically, one of my philosophies is the best tube tester is an amp. You know, like sure, my tube tester can tell me if there's shorts. It can tell me, you know, how much life is left and whatnot, which is very important. You know, I don't want to put it. That helps me throw tubes away that are going to potentially harm an amp or whatever. But in terms of microphonics and how it sounds, the best thing to do was put it in an amp. So that's what I did. I built that for it. One of the you'll notice on different pictures you've shown in terms of the graphics, that's like my least strong suit with these amps.
I think the graphics are cool. It's got like the Middle Eastern font and
I just mean getting the graphics on because
okay.
painting on metal is not super simple. You need to actually like match the paint and primer and the metal and prep. And you know, I've gone through water slide decals, which are a pain and can peel up. That one is actually etched with it's not etched, it's etched through electrolysis. So basically you put some sort of film over it with the negative of what you want printed, and you hook a car battery up to part of the metal, and the other one's hooked to a cotton ball with an electrolyte in it, say water and salt, and it just etches through the metal. I was doing that at I was sharing a shop with my dad, and they live on a well, So some of the stuff that you use to etch um, chemically, sulfuric acid and stuff like that, even if you're not being careless with it, you could still drop some of that on the floor and it seeps into the groundwater. And that's just not the kind of stuff you want to be drinking or, putting in the ground. So
No way.
figuring out a way to do that was pretty cool. I've switched to using a local trophy shop to just make, because they can use this dye sublimation process where I don't know, I think it uses something similar to a t-shirt press, but it can take full color graphics and put it on metal like that he Hioma used that. Um, but it looks real sharp, and you know, to be honest, it's not for the amount of time that I've spent painting amps or putting water slide decals on and waiting for them to dry and clear coating, like using a local trophy shop. It's not like it costs a bunch of money, and I get to help another local business, which I like because I'm a local business.
Totally. That's interesting. I've heard other people mention the trophy shops too for this sort of metal work. Um, so Dr. Z Stangray clone 6v6s. That's got, really nice smooth harmonics. Um, almost tweed-like. So is that cathode biased if it's tweed-like?
Well, no, these are fixed bias. So the actual Stingray runs 4 EL84s, which you're talking 30-ish watts, say. Um, Using a pair of 6v6 and fixed bias, we figure I'm getting 20 plus watts. I don't know, probably 24 or whatever watts output. So it's a comparable output, but with tubes I had, which was a lot more convenient. The tube you have is, it's sort of the RG Keen philosophy that the component you have, whether it's a resistor or a capacitor, that it might not be the exact right value, but the one that you have in hand sounds a lot better than the one you got to wait a week to come into the mail. But
RG Keen?
yes, he's a guy. He wrote was it GeoFX is his website. He's the technology of the fuzz face. One, I learned how to do stuff from reading forums and reading stuff from smarter people than me that are, actual electrical engineers and stuff like that.
He's
RG Keen's one of the guys that, he's in terms of the DIY guitar electronics communities, one of the the big guys, him, Merlin, a bunch of people on the EL34 World Forums and Tube Amp Garage and stuff.
is he associated with Dead End Effects? Because I did a Ludwig Phase 2 clone that Geo Effects was cited. Their work was cited in that build.
Probably just as a reference because it's been around for the website's been around for a long time, and that's one of the cool things about the era that we're in is that all this information is just available. Like some of the people that have been doing this since the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, they actually had to um read through the tube manuals and try a lot of stuff out and probably get shocked and all this other kinds of crazy stuff that be on the we get to walk on the back of their experience, which is awesome. The DIY guitar community is great with that there's people that they don't have to give back and they do, which I love. I wouldn't be where I am without that, without a bunch of the, guitar mods, guitar nuts forum was that's where I got my start being interested in working on guitars because I had a Squire Affinity Strat with the only pickup that really sounded like anything was the middle pickup, and I was like, well, hey, I want to gut this and build something that I can use all the pickups on. I don't know. It's really cool that all the information that's available out there for people that want to do this kind of stuff, and the way that the community accepts people with open arms like that.
Well, yeah, and it's an art that needs to be preserved too. I mean, tube amps and the philosophy and skills that go along with building and repairing them. I mean, not a lot of people out there are willing to do it, and it's very important. We have so many people that don't understand the technology of a tube amp, but they're out there buying a hot rod series Fender or whatever, some Marshall tube head. There's got to be people that can service these things and help people out with them, because if there isn't, they're all going to end up like the Hammond organs, like, I mean, and all these folks that are into the modelers, that's great and everything. That's everybody, talks about it, the modelers taking over, but yeah, to me, there's no substitute. And obviously to people like you and, everyone else, anyone that's on this show is not an amp modeler, aficionado. So
They're way expensive. And the technology changes so fast. When I was in college, our radio station had rack mount pod preamps that, it probably like the first pods. The guitar one was okay. The bass one made every single sound but like a good bass sound. Like I could sound like a spaceship was landing, but I couldn't get just a normal rock bass sound that, I mean, they've come a long way. What the future holds, who knows? I mean, it is a lot of, the people that have developed, the it is a dying skill. Not that I don't toot my own horn. I mean, I play around with guitar amps because I don't really want to get a real job, so it works out a lot nicer this way. But yeah, it's a dying skill. Who knows when the last guitar amp or guitar tube amp's going to be made. I mean, we're probably looking at tubes not being made for very much longer. I mean, at this point, it's only in certain places because of byproducts of making tubes. But I don't know. There also are caches. One of my dad's friend was telling me he knew a guy with a whole tractor trailer full of tubes from one of the RCA plants when they stopped doing tubes. They just parked the trailer in the guy's kind of yard. That I would love to go through that.
oh my
Like a
God.
kid in a candy store. I mean, that metered out online after testing and stuff. That could be a retirement plan.
Yeah, big time. I mean, as long as there's people like us, and that's the whole point of the show for me, is helping people learn. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that gets talked about that goes over people's heads. And for me, like I follow most of it, but sometimes there's things that are over my head. But it's a gradual knowledge to acquire, and I want to get in your position at some point where I can hang out, design a guitar amp or two, and I've got a lot of the skills. There are just certain things like certain terms and freaking the nature of things that I just need to hone in on. But I'm getting pretty close. I mean, if you give me a kid, I can build a kid. So I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's one of the things I did not expect, that the metalworking and the woodworking especially. I've gotten a lot better at woodworking than when I started out. I still have the first 2x12 I made, like, way over engineered. I never finished it. It was just, you know, it probably took me a week and a half to make, kind of thing. And, it's just the things that I've been able to learn, and those kind of skills I didn't expect. I thought I was just gonna, solder stuff together, but there's a whole lot of other stuff. And I can tell you, I'm not a good businessman in terms of marketing and all that other stuff. And I don't know, I'm fine with it. I mean, I meet a lot of cool people, and I've gotten to make some cool things for some people, and um, that's good enough. I get to keep the lights on, and I don't know, I not much more I can ask for. And I've got
Well,
to try a lot of different circuits.
we've
Try a Vox or a Marshall, or I've gotten to repair a bunch of stuff that I never would have been able to afford to try. I repaired this guy's dad's early 70s Marshall kind of thing that, was really cool to be able to get that working well. That I'm definitely not in the market for a $3,000 or $4,000 head.
Yeah, it's not even a plexi. It's still a metal panel at that point. A plexi is $6,000 to $12,000 now.
Right, and I drive a truck I paid 2,100 for 6 years ago. So I do, and that's fine. It when I need to pick up stuff from the Home Depot, it serves its purpose. So
Sure.
that's, I don't know. Like I said, I don't ever think I'll be a Fortin or a Friedman or anything like that. But if I could make stuff and you know get people playing it, that's pretty cool. Seeing somebody use something that you've made to make some music.
Well, I mean, some of the guys that have been on this show, I know we've only got one episode up, but I think you're the fourth or fifth interview so far. So it's going to be loaded on pretty soon. But some of us have talked about doing like a commission or association between the designers where everybody can pitch in under one umbrella and you can order more parts, and everybody's contribution and needs are chipped in because there's, I don't know, 10 businesses that you're ordering parts for, and you can buy things cheaper that way. And maybe some of the promotion is, baked into that. And there's the power in numbers thing where, you know, because like the way I look at it is, why in the hell would anybody want to buy anything new from Marshall, Fender, Ace Boogie, like any of the, I mean, you want to get an amp made by a local dude at this point because they're making stuff that is within the spec of, the classic amps. And like you do like a brown face clone, an orange matte amp clone, you got a plexi, uh, all sorts of things. And some of these other guys have the Jose covered, the Hot Rod Jose Marshalls, Soldanos, Tweeds. I mean, at some point, you put all that together, it's like, that's about as cool as it gets, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm big buying local stuff anyway. Uh, like I said, if I'm supporting the trophy shop by having him make my faceplates, they usually, the trophy shop supports a little league team, and you know, um, all that, local food stores and all that other stuff. I don't know. I think that's a really big thing that escapes because I could log on to Amazon and I could buy a Marshall or I could buy a Fender and have it delivered to my door tomorrow, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, they may certainly they can make some good products, but they've got the name there, and so the name sells a lot. Yeah, I mean, you could stick a Marshall badge on just about anything, and I think I've even seen a Marshall like stack refrigerator, like a mini fridge kind of thing that put a Marshall thing on whatever and it sells.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's not like people are basically just looking for like the flagship legendary models. It's like I don't know. I mean, it really depends. There's some people out there that could give a shit the backstory of the amp. They're just like, hey, does it do high gain? Can I run my pedals through it properly? Okay, I'll buy it. It's like Marshall DSL 100 or something. So,
Oh man, I had a '98 DSL that all the problems the early DSLs get, it had. I ended up just
geez.
gutting the thing and I built a Marshall JCM 800 bass amp into it, just because again, it probably the weirdest Marshall circuit ever, kind of thing. Like the tone controls, nothing on that amp really reflects anything that Marshall ever did before or has done since. But um, uh, yeah, I get what you're saying with that, but
This is kind of interesting. We were just looking at the this amp, Irulon, and that's your woodwork there. Do you have to, is this all hand measured or
usually yes. The panel saw that they have at Home Depot is a godsend, especially because at that point I didn't have a very good table saw. So just because you're cutting it on the table saw doesn't mean it's going to be straight. But um, yeah, I mean it all starts as uh, a sheet of plywood and 1x2s. Those are pine. Sometimes I'll use poplar. I don't use birch plywood because the stuff's like super expensive,
hmm,
and there's plenty of good decent quality plywood that you know sure maybe the birch plywood's a little bit sturdier if you're throwing your cab around, but um I don't know, I don't throw my amps around and don't expect most folks to do that. So normal as long as it's a decent number of sheet pine plywood is fine. Actually, the top of that, the little head shells made from construction grade plywood that was left over from putting in subfloors in the house I was living in. Because again, I don't like to throw stuff out, so I had some offcuts of wood that I was able to reuse. And for something like the head there, it's attached to the speaker cabinet, so it's not like it needs to be super duper sturdy because it's all one piece.
interesting. And that's the one right behind you. Let's go to you real quick in the gallery mode. 1 second. There we go. Uh, and that's the black one, right? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there it is. It's all one piece. That's kind of like a vintage philosophy too. I like that. It's an old school.
Well, yeah, like the Ampeg flip tops that the amp head was inside the speaker cabinet, just flipped upside down kind of thing. Like uh interesting stuff is I don't know what exactly. I don't know if I maybe didn't even have enough wood to do the bottom of the head and just decided to put them all together kind of thing, like I don't know what my reasoning was. It was just I did it. thought that might be an interesting thing. And it's on wheels, which is super nice. Anything big like that, I put on wheels because I've had to load in and load out, and not having wheels sucks.
I've had some issues lately with amps that have the casters on them, and like some of those old 60s or 70s casters you can't find anymore. It's oddball,
Hmm.
you know, oddball connections, but I ended up having to just jam this wheel in and like seal it shut so it doesn't move. But hey, at least it gets things leveled. And honestly, it actually helps because now the amp doesn't have the potential of, moving somewhere on its own. Well, yeah, man, I'm gonna go get my car real quick, but it's been really cool having you on, dude. And I definitely want to have you back and get that preamp off you whenever it's available. And yeah, like you want to tell anybody about, future stuff or how to reach you?
Um, I mean, I pretty much have an Instagram just for business stuff. It was Brooks Blackhawk, at his suggestion, because I shot him a message on Facebook a couple years back, because he does decent numbers of amps and pedals and stuff, and I was asked what his suggestion, and he said, "Hey, I got an Instagram, and that's probably been my best advertisement." That, and you know at the time he was fairly active in some Facebook groups. So Instagram, email, um, what is it? Instagram's at Arafel Electronics. Through that you can find email and the Facebook and the Reverb store. And I don't know. I don't have an actual website because I don't really feel like updating an actual website. I rarely update the Instagram recently because I've been surrounded by doing house stuff. So, um, it, but those are easiest ways to reach me. I share schematics. I mean, when somebody asks, what is it? If I try to keep good notes, whether it's that, whether it's pedal mods, I don't believe in secrets in this kind of stuff. I believe in, you know, if I know I got into doing a lot of this stuff because well, one, where I lived, I'd pay $70 to have a guy look at an amp, and it would come back still broken, and I'd be $70 poorer. But I also got into it because you can save some money if you're building your own amps or maintaining your own stuff. But so people want schematics or mod ideas on pedals. I love modding DoD pedals and Boss pedals, so I keep a notebook full of that kind of stuff. I
We
don't know.
should, sorry about that. We should talk about your pedals at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that happens quite infrequently in terms of making them, just because um it's a pain. I always worked on perf and perf board and making my own boards and stuff, and um but now it's just kind of mojo type pedals, point to point or turret board or eyelet board or whatever. um One guy that there's this guy Reeves Electro over in the UK that makes like point to point pedals, where he makes these like cool um ground buses out of thick wires and stuff. Like, if there's anybody whose work I'm jealous of, it's him, because it's gorgeous. It's great to follow somebody doing that kind of stuff.
Let's check out his work real quick before we go. I'm curious now. Okay, let's type this guy's name in. What's his name?
It's REEV Reeves Electro.
Well, there we go. That's actually like a pretty good page to be on. It really shows a lot of what he does here.
Hmm. Really, and it's everything. You know, he etches the enclosures, he paints the enclosures, he's got a stamp that goes on the boxes and everything. It's just real cool stuff. I have no idea what I've only ever looked at his stuff on Instagram. I've never actually been to the webpage.
Oh, he's got a high gain range master with, wow, that's cool. Some fuzz. Man, the fuzz market is just so loaded with people making fuzz pedals now. Let's look at that range master real quick. Oh, cool. It's got this. Oh, that's pretty clean. Here we go. All right, I'm just gonna click and leave it alone. Yeah, what's this? I think this is what you were just talking about. This like square thick wire.
Yeah, that's the ground bus, and that's what's holding a lot of the stuff up. I just to think that somebody has like the picture of this in their head, how to do, just like I'm not a painter, so I don't know how somebody can like have a picture of a beautiful painting in their head and make it happen. Like this kind of stuff. I don't know, it's really pretty looking and it's really clean, and the fact that it also sounds good is awesome.
What do you think that wire? I see it going to one of these ground bus. I see that resistor to the left of the two transistors, the silver transistors. It looks like it's going directly into a diode. I doubt it is, but at the same time,
Well, and that's the whole like three-dimensional thing, that it's laid out in three dimensions, that I'm not sure.
yeah, that'd be cool to know that. Let's check out another pedal real quick. Uh, what's your favorite pedal by
I do I I don't have any expensive fuzzes. That's one of the reasons I got into making fuzzes, is because I couldn't afford them. And but I mean they're all real cool looking, and when he demos them out, they sound real cool too.
Mullard tropical fish caps? Weird. He really does do these ground bus things pretty well. Um, let's see. Is this going to do the same thing? All right. Oh, I see what the deal is. You can't let go of the cursor. I got it. That's cool. Um, man, it's so simple. I forget what these, is that just like a six-way toggle strip switch? Is that what that's called?
No, it's a three pole um double throw switch. That's the foot switch. So that's a true bypass foot switch with LED.
Double pull, double throw.
Well, it's three poles, because you need the pole. You know, you need one pole each to switch the in and out,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third one for the LED.
And that LED right there is the diode right above it, the one with the red, black, and white translucent, I think.
Not, I don't think so.
Oh
I
no,
don't know.
that's a capacitor.
Yeah, it's one of those polyethylene or something that always end up melting on me because they're super delicate.
It looks like it. It looks like it's sort of melted in. Um, there's a guy that does. Let me go to this guy's page real quick, and then like I'm sure you want to you got to get going. And let's see, what's this guy's name? R2R. He uses all new old stock components in his builds, literally like vintage Spragues and Mullards, all that. He does some really cool range masters. Okay, let's go to
I
this.
saw it looked like he had a direct clone of the Range Master.
It's pretty much, yeah. Let's just look at this Treble Booster Pro real quick. Yeah, he just uses new old stock components. Looks like a really old school triple pull switch, and there's his ground bus. Yeah, you know, like he's got direct clones of these R2Rs. Would you ever consider doing something like that with new old stock if you could find it?
Not really, just because having to test the capacitors to make sure they're not leaky before, just it's kind of sorting is a pain with that kind of stuff. Mostly with the new old stock capacitors, I've just sold them for tone caps and whatnot. I also don't mess with new old stock electrolytics because I don't know. I want something brand new because they'll degrade over time, and I don't want to go through the hassle of reforming them. And I try to keep it as simple as possible for everything I do.
Another thing is your customers might get pissed off if something goes bad. You never know with something like that when the time it's going to go.
All right, that's why using new parts. At times I'll use new old stock, like a film cap probably is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. There's a couple of like surplus stores you can get them from. But in terms of electrolytics, I don't. It's just I like brand new electrolytics. I like them in my old amps. I like to know the thing's gonna work and work reliably, especially if I'm selling it to somebody else. I want to make sure that it's reliable to them and not gonna need the caps replaced in short order.
Yeah, and like how much impact does an electrolytic really have on the tone as long as it's like a halfway decent electrolytic?
Right. I mean, there it's value, and especially these days, the floor for quality of parts is very high. I mean, you can get real good parts for not a whole lot of money, where especially back in the 40s when it was cheaper to use design with transformers and chokes than it was with big electrolytic caps because caps were expensive, which blows my mind that a big hunk of iron was somehow cheaper than a little cap with some foil and salt water in it. Just because these days it's the exact opposite. Caps are dirt cheap and a big hunk of iron is expensive.
Yeah, maybe just the efficiency of the technology back then just wasn't there to produce them that well. Well, man, like I've got some people yelling at me to get going, but again, really appreciate you coming on, and I'd love to buy one of your amps as soon as possible, and I need the preamp as soon as possible too. All right. Well, on that note, man, we're gonna have to fart out for the day. But...
Yeah.
Thanks for watching Gearland Nation. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. For affiliate links to the gear we used to shoot this video and when available, the gear we discussed, check the description.